Okay. Right, so good morning and welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're presenting today in conjunction with our esteemed colleagues at Planet Mark. The topic today is what is the business case for sustainability and net zero? So as I've previously mentioned, your microphones and cameras are turned off, but there will be time for questions at the end of the webinar, or as I said, as you're going along, if you use the Q&A function, my colleague Sam is monitoring that and we can answer any as we're going along. So let's introduce us today. So you have myself, Di. I'm your host today. We also have from BICSc, Samantha, our Business Development Manager. And we have James and Roxana, who are from Planet Mark. They will be presenting to you today. So James and Roxana, it's over to you two. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Di. So without further ado, I'll also share my screen. Thank you everyone for joining us today. So, can everyone see? I just get a thumbs up from the brilliant. So, thank you so much for joining us all today. So yeah, taking time out of your busy calendars, where we're going to discuss this topic, what is the business case for sustainability and net zero? So a little bit of housekeeping. Di did also mention these factors, but for those of you who have joined us at previous Planet Mark webinars, you know that today's session will be recorded, and in a follow-up email, you'll have this recording and all of the slides. So if you see lots of data and lots of figures, don't worry too much because you will have access to all of these after the session as well. Your cameras are off screen and you're muted, but please do use the Q&A function and we will endeavour to answer all your questions at the end of the session. So also please do connect with us on social media. You can find us at the Planet Mark. So as Di kindly introduced us, my name is Roxana. I'm a partnership executive at Planet Mark, and my colleague James will introduce himself now.
Yeah, thanks, Roxy. Hi, everyone. My name is James Shorey. I am the Partnerships Manager at Planet Mark. So a lot of the work that Roxy and I do is working with trade associations and industry bodies like BICSc, for example, to basically educate all of you guys as members on what net zero is, how to properly approach sustainability, and how to make yourselves more future focused and commercially resilient as well. So Roxy, I can't see the presentation anymore. Oh, there you go. So great. If you just go to the next slide, before we get started, I just want to make sure that everyone knew that, because of the partnership that Planet Mark and BICSc have, there are actually quite a lot of benefits for all BICSc members. So as well as a 10% discount, if any of you did want to sign up to Planet Mark certification and get properly certified for your sustainability credentials, there's a 10% discount there. And we have a lot of public CPD accredited workshops, which you would be able to get a 50% discount off of as well, just purely through being BICSc members. You can also reach out to any one of us, including me and Roxy, if any of you have any burning questions about sustainability or any complex tenders coming up, or any of your clients are asking about sustainability and asking specific questions of you, you can pick up the phone and call us at any time or book a meeting with us. And we're happy to give a 30-minute free sort of carbon clinic advice session to help you sort out any issues there, because we want to make sure that all of BICSc's members are properly equipped and properly advised when it comes to sustainability. And as is on the slide, there's lots of free educational webinars like this one today, and we're going to be having lots of free access to toolkits and resources. Again, just let us know if you want to find out more about that. But just to clarify, Planet Mark is a consultancy and certification body when it comes to net zero. So that's why we've been asked to present to you guys today. So if you go to the next slide, we wanted to structure the conversation today as you're seeing on screen, the agenda. So what we're going to do first of all is just basically go through what is net zero and what are the different key points in sustainability that you guys need to know about, and then we'll uncover some of the key business drivers as well, and what some of the benefits and some of the challenges that some businesses are facing when it comes to sustainability. And then at the end, we'll give you some key advice and highlight some case studies of businesses that have actually started sustainability sustainability journeys and really reaped the benefits, not only from a commercial standpoint, but from a policy and compliance standpoint as well. So we'll run through some real life examples so you don't have to just take it from us. And if we have any time at the end, we'll have Q&A. So please, as Roxy said, please do use the Q&A function or pop questions in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. Great. So first of all, we're going to just do a bit of scene setting and focus on what is net zero and where does it fit into the sustainability agenda. So when you think about net zero, and sustainability, the reason why this is such a focus, the reason why a lot of companies are focusing on this and governments are focusing on this is because of the graph that you see in front of you today. So it's a very simple graph. Basically, scientists have used carbon isotopes and oxygen isotope data to track the warm periods and cold periods throughout Earth's life, going back tens and hundreds of thousands of years into the past. So you can see parts per million on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. And as you can kind of see with the undulating up and down, the Earth naturally goes into warmer and colder periods. These are called Milankovitch cycles because the Earth goes slightly closer to the sun, slightly further away. It tilts on its axis. So the concept of the Earth going through warm and cold periods is nothing new. That happens all the time, and we've seen it happen for millions, if not tens of millions of years in the past. What the issue is currently is the line that you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, where the line is going much higher than ever previously seen before. And that is primarily down to the Industrial Revolution because of human impact. And we're getting into uncharted territory and we're going up so much more quicker than we've ever seen in any previous way before. The line going up means we're going to be facing mass extinction events. We're going to be seeing massive global climate change and more extreme weather events hitting various places in the world more frequently every single year if we don't act now. So this is the reason why sustainability is such a focus and why there's such a focus on reducing our carbon impact and reducing the parts per million in the atmosphere. Next slide. Another way to represent this was actually created by a professor called Richard Hawkins at Reading University, and he decided instead of that complicated graph that you saw, he's just going to plot it in a nice color-coded way. So if we start on the left-hand side, that's further back in time, and then current day is on the right-hand side. And I think it's relatively clear to see that the blue lines are cooler periods or times where we've been closer to pre-industrial levels before the Industrial Revolution. And as you progress, you can see that the world is just ever so slowly, ever so progressively getting warmer and warmer and warmer, closer to 1.5 degrees warming versus pre-industrial levels and getting close to 2 degrees, which doesn't sound like a lot, but once you actually get to those levels, that's when you see really terrible things starting to accelerate in the world when it comes to, like I said before, extreme weather events and mass extinctions of certain animal groups as well. So we want to try and make sure that we have less red lines and we start going back to the blue lines. That's the objective. When we are looking at net zero and carbon neutrality, though, if you go to the next slide, you can kind of boil down the objectives into this, making sure that the carbon sources, the amount of carbon naturally emitted by the world and by humans, the carbon sources, is in balance with the amount of carbon that can naturally be absorbed by the earth through trees and plants and algae and things like that. Pre-industrial levels, before we started, industrializing, this was in balance. So the amount of carbon naturally exuded was just naturally absorbed, and the parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere was in balance, which was fantastic. Unfortunately, we're now at a point where the carbon sources is massively over balanced the amount that the world can naturally absorb. So therefore, we've got way too much carbon in the atmosphere. The greenhouse gas effect then really heats the earth. So the objective of net zero is to make sure that carbon sources and carbon sinks get back into balance again. There are two objectives, or there's two strategies of doing this. So there's, which you may have heard of. So there's carbon neutrality and there's net zero. Carbon neutrality is very focused on investing in carbon sinks, so the right-hand side of your screen, and very focused on investing in planting more trees and creating more opportunities for renewable energy and creating more opportunities for extraction of carbon from the atmosphere, which is all well and good. But I think the key underlying issue is there are not enough carbon sinks in the world if we keep creating carbon sources at the same rate that we currently are. So carbon neutrality is a great initiative, but it's not going to be the solution that achieves net zero. Net zero, on the other hand, is much more focused on reducing the amount of carbon sources on the left-hand side and bringing that down while also investing in carbon sinks. And I think it's hopefully clear, even with this simple graph, a simple presentation graphic on your screen, that not only do we need to invest in carbon sinks, we also need to make sure that the carbon sources are brought down as well. And that's the focus of net zero, to try and reduce the amount of emissions for every single country and every single business as well, reductions. If you go to the next slide, when we talk about carbon emissions, you can kind of break carbon emissions down into three categories: scopes 1, scopes 2, and scopes 3. So this isn't something Planet Mark came up with by ourselves. This is something that the Greenhouse Gas Protocol came up with, and this is implemented everywhere in the world for every single country and every single business of every type everywhere in the world. And it's a really great categorization that allows companies to clearly identify how their business impacts the environment around them. So if we go through them individually, scopes 1 and 2 are the emissions that a company just naturally or directly emits themselves. So scope 1 are the actual fuels and the hydrocarbons that you as a company are physically burning, thereby creating carbon and greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So that's things like burning gas to heat your buildings and putting petrol and diesel into your company vehicles, your company fleet. And then the carbon dioxide comes out the tailgate of that. So that's scope 1. Scope 2 is similar. It's the electricity that you use. And even though you're not the ones burning the hydrocarbons or the fuel to generate that electricity, you're purchasing that electricity. So you are responsible for that being burned even off-site at the power generation plants. So that is scopes 1 and 2. There's then scope 3, which is basically looking at your then tier 1 impact of your business. So there's some really great examples of this, and it gets quite complicated because you can think how many different touch points your company has in the environment and the economy around you. So it's things like scope 3 category 1 is your supply chain. So thinking about where you're buying your goods and your services and the carbon intensity of those goods and services. There's also things like waste. So, you throw things in the bin and you give it to a waste contractor. You're not the one who is driving the lorries or actually putting it into landfill or recycling it and spending all that energy recycling it, but you paid for that service. You're partially responsible for the emissions generated from that. Same with business travel. You don't own the plane, you're not fueling the plane, and you don't fly the plane, but you bought a ticket on that plane, so you're partially responsible for that flight happening and therefore the emissions of that flight as well. So you can kind of see that through your business operations, even though you're not responsible directly for those emissions, because of the way that you spend your money and who you engage with, you are having an impact on the environment as well. And that's what scope 3 is focused on. So between scopes 1, 2, and 3, the idea is that you would try and quantify and measure all of those emissions. And by doing that, you would get a really good idea of your total carbon footprint and your total impact on the environment. But how does that relate to net zero? If we go to the next slide, this is the graph of how businesses try and achieve net zero. So when we say net zero, the objective for countries and for the businesses within those countries is to try and reduce your emissions, scopes 1, 2, and 3, by 90% by a set end goal, a set end date. So for the UK, they've decided that for the whole of the UK as a country, they're going to try and reduce the country's entire emissions by 90% by an end date of 2050. So we've basically got 25 years to figure out how we're going to reduce our emissions by a certain amount, 90% by that end date. There's also an interim target usually of 50% reductions by 2030. And that's what the UK has signed up to. By doing that, and it's enshrined in law, by doing that, it expects all businesses in the UK to align with that as well. So it's asking every single business in the UK, can you set an end goal that aligns with us, 2050 or even sooner if you think you can be more optimistic about it? And can you try and reduce your emissions by 90% by that end date as well? What's involved in that is, in order to reduce by 90%, you need to know what your emissions are, the 100% level that you're reducing against. You need to set a baseline. So what I've done here on the left-hand side is use 2020. So I've assumed that this company has measured their scopes 1, 2, and 3 and got a really good idea of their carbon footprint in the year 2020. And then what they're going to do is try and reduce their emissions by 90% based on that baseline year. So whatever that, if that baseline year was, say, 10 tons of carbon, they need to know that in 2050 they're only producing 1 ton of carbon as their business operations. And then if they've done that, they know they will have achieved net zero. And also by 2030, they need to make sure they're only producing 5 tons of carbon, for example. And that is net zero. The idea behind it is that you are slowly and progressively over 25 years becoming a better and better business by implementing small incremental changes. Like there can be anything from like a cycle to work scheme, making sure that less of your employees are using cars to get to work. It could even be just changing the materials that you use when you are on site delivering a service. It could be anything. It could be like in thinking about how you can, maybe switch to a green energy tariff so your office doesn't use as much dirty electricity when you're buying that from the grid. Little things like that that you can implement between now and 2050 to make sure that you're slowly reducing your emissions as you get to the end date. We try and remind everyone it's a marathon, not a sprint. So it's lots of small changes that you can make to slowly get that number down. And that, in hopefully a clear way, is net zero. There's one final slide I wanted to show you as well before I hand over to Roxy, but that's the commercial, that's the sort of how you do it. The reason why this was implemented, or the reason why this maybe applies to some of you in the room, is because, like I said, there are international treaties and a lot of scientists that sat down at the COP and the Paris Climate Agreement and decided that this is what we need to do to avert the climate crisis. The actual objective of that graph and that end date is because that's what the scientists have determined, that if we all collectively try and achieve that, we'll keep global warming to below 1.5 degrees of global warming based on pre-industrial levels. So if we can do that, we can avert the worst of climate change and climate disasters, which I hope makes a sense to everyone. So that's where the international treaties and those international agreements come into play. That then filters down to individual countries. So like I said, the UK decided that yes, we'll align to that. We'll set our target of 2050. Other countries may have different targets. So I think China has 2060 and India has different targets as well. There's actually some countries that have even closer targets than that as well. But the UK should just focus on 2050. And then that then filters down to large corporates who are then asked to report to government through schemes like SECA and ESOS. And there's some European schemes like CSRD if any companies operate in Europe. I'm going to assume a lot of business people on this call are from smaller companies, so you don't have to comply with these rules and you don't have to report to government. There's no policies or compliance put on you right now. But what I would say is you have to be mindful of the businesses that you work with, because if one of these large companies is your client, so you are a cleaning company or you supply one of these larger businesses who do have to report to government, you sit in their supply chain and therefore you sit in their scope 3, which means that these large companies, when they do report to government, are going to be asking you for carbon data, and they're going to be wanting to make sure that you're on the same journey that they are, because the only way that they're going to be able to reach net zero is if you also try and achieve net zero with them as well. The good news is that these companies will probably provide lots of insetting and lots of really beneficial like funding and schemes to help you do it, and they should be providing you with some education similar to what we're doing today. But yeah, just keep that in mind, that even if you're not, required to report to government, one of your large customers may be, so you might be asked for some of that data, and you may be asked to set targets and go on the journey with them as well. So even though you may not feel like you need to align with these rules, the chances are that one of your customers does, and you're going to be asked to do that. And it may come up in tenders if you're applying to work with these larger businesses in the future as well. So something to think about there. And with that, I will stop giving you the background and let Roxy talk about some of the actual sort of commercial challenges and the commercial benefits of starting this journey.
Thank you so much, James. And now James has kindly set the scene on why we should care about a changing climate. I'm going to move on and talk about some of the business drivers of net zero. So why would a business adopt a net zero strategy? So on the board is 3 reasons. And in an ideal world, moral imperative would be the only reason, but the reality is that moral imperative is not always enough because we have to focus on businesses and what they are here to do with their own internal goals and challenges. But as we know, climate change is altering our world in many different ways, and business operations have to adapt to a changing world. So let's look at the commercial risk and opportunity. And this really links into what James was just mentioning about the value chain and how all organizations do not work in isolation. We all have a value chain with upstream suppliers and downstream clients. Um, so it's really important to understand your supply chains and what physical risks of climate change might disrupt your value chain at any point. And this really helps to mitigate risks and seize opportunities. And again, just looking at the legal imperative as well, which James also mentioned, in addition, more and more regulation is coming in to facilitate this shift towards net zero. Perhaps most notably is the Paris Agreement and the UK's commitment to reach net zero by 2050 at the latest, which was a law made in 2019. Um, this means that every UK business, from micro businesses to large undertakings, must reduce their total greenhouse gas emissions by 90% by the end of 2050 at the latest. And as James mentioned, 50% by 2030, which is only 5 years away. So to track progress against these targets, environmental reporting is already a legal requirement for large businesses. And whilst it's not at the moment for small businesses, we can expect this mandatory reporting to trickle down in the future towards smaller businesses. We're not sure when, but it is a possibility. So again, just to echo James, mentioning again that value chain, somewhere on that value chain, an organisation will be facing a legal imperative to have their net zero transition plans in place. And that means that pressure might end up falling somewhere on your organisation's shoulders as well from your value chain. So we've spoken a lot about the driver sustainability and net zero and for business, but what are the statistics saying? So this was a survey undertaken by IBM, and I won't go into incredible detail on this slide or the upcoming slides because everyone on the call will have a copy of these slides. So you'll feel free to go through them again. But really, these statistics highlight that key stakeholders, so your investors, consumers, employees, and executives, all significantly believe that sustainability is a relevant factor for strategic decisions. And that is a significant figure, over 60%. And it is worth mentioning that these are current figures, and I have no doubt that in 5 years' time, they will most likely be considerably higher. So overall, the high level message is sustainability is crucial for businesses, and all stakeholders across the value chain are taking it into account. But we understand that integrating a net zero transition plan into your business is not easy. And there are significant challenges that organizations of all sizes face. So let's look at challenges first, and the first one of time and resource. I imagine that any organization who have already embarked on their net zero journey on this call, or even thinking about doing so, will sympathize with this one. And at Planet Mark, we are very conscious of this because it does take time and resources within your team. We do try to lift some of the burden here. And also one way we are seeing some of our members tackle this particular challenge is by allocating specific green champions or green teams within the organization who can focus on this part of the organization's goals and missions as part of their own individual growth and development. The next challenge is customer demands. Now, this links in with the commercial imperative we mentioned before. But there is a commercial risk that you will have a client requesting your specific ESG metrics or carbon emissions for their own reporting standards. So that's mentioning again your value chain. Now, the risk you may face if you cannot provide this data is that your client simply will go to a competitor who can. And lastly, let's look at transparency in your supply chain and what exactly this means. So ultimately, this goes back again to the value chain with upstream suppliers and downstream clients. And organizations will have tens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of suppliers. And many of those are very small organizations who might also not have access to that data. So this is another big challenge that we are seeing our clients face. But while all these challenges exist, the outcomes for taking sustainability and net zero into account hopefully make it all worth it. To run through these quite quickly, I'm just checking the time. Financial performance. So the financial performance can improve as a result of taking sustainability and net zero into account. For example, increasing profitability by engaging with more customers, or also by potentially charging more for your products given the value add of your ESG metrics. Brand recognition. This is a big one. But if your brand is not seen as one that is responsible and caring about climate and sustainability, it can really impact your organization. But on the flip side, as a sustainable market leader, you are certainly going to stand out in a positive way. And finally, just linking back to those legal imperatives. So the expectation is that compliance and risk management is how all organizations need to move going forward. So getting ahead of those legislative curves now really puts you ahead of your competitors as well. So I just want to quickly touch on the UK Net Zero Business Census. It was a first of its kind research initiative delivered by Planet Mark in partnership with the UK Business Climate Hub. And the first of this research initiative took place last year in 2024. And I'm glad to say we're repeating the exercise again for this year. It will be an annual exercise repeated every year. But last year we gathered over 2,000 responses from our survey from organisations of all sizes and sectors across the UK. And the objective on the board here to assess net zero measures being implemented by organisations as a benchmark for UK industry progress. And before I quickly touch on the findings, I think it's really important to give a big thank you to the partners of the UK Net Zero Business Census because they helped us brilliantly with promoting the survey and then the census report. So a massive thank you to all of our partners. And as you can see, BICSc was also one of our census partners, as well as being a partner of Planet Mark. So a big thank you to BICSc there as well. And I'll just quickly go through some of the findings. Again, there's a lot of information on the following slides, and you'll all have access to these slides. So I won't touch on absolutely everything. The UK Net Zero Business Census report is also completely free to access, so we can share that as well for those interested. But on this slide, let's just look at the key highlights here. But it just highlights how net zero has become a strategic priority for organisations. So one of the figures I'll just point out here is 80% prioritising wider sustainability goals, with 90% anticipating a positive impact on public perception, which is brilliant. Again, lots of figures on this board, so do have a look at the slides afterwards. And also it's probably important here also to look at the barriers as well. So for instance, on here, cost is one of the highest barriers, with 59% reporting it as so. I think this also really highlighted that different sized organisations face different barriers. So the much smaller SMEs and micro SMEs reported a lack of time, expertise, regulatory certainty, and overall having fewer resources, whereas the larger organisations reference outdated infrastructure that most likely does not capture the entirety of their more lengthy value chain. But let's also check out some of the benefits. So again, this slide shows many different statistics, and the high level message would be that there are lots of different benefits when it comes to net zero. We spoke about lots of these before when we talked about the 3 different imperatives. And a lot of these you could actually probably fit into those 3 different imperatives. And let's look at the top 2. So the top one is contributing to tackling climate change, which is brilliant because it's a reference to the moral imperative that we discussed. And it's the #1 reason organisations are contributing to net zero. And the second one is the organisational reputation, which fits into the commercial and business side of things, so the commercial imperative. So already in those first 2 questions, we can see 2 of the different imperatives being spoken to in the census. Okay, brilliant. So as a case study, I want to talk you through how Planet Mark has been helping businesses to achieve net zero and some of the changes we've made in our approach. Just to explain this image, so for those who don't know, Planet Mark was founded in partnership with the Eden Project. So this here, the the different biomes is the Eden Project in Cornwall, and it's actually a disused quarry that now houses these beautiful different biomes. And members of Planet Mark do have access to some free tickets to the Eden Project. So Eden Project was actually a founding member 12 years ago, since day one. And since then, we've been certifying businesses who make carbon reductions year on year. And again, in this image, the blue bus there was actually in the lead up to COP26. We drove an electric bus, so this was entirely electric, down from the Eden Project up to Glasgow, where COP26 was hosted, with a whole zero carbon tour of educational activities on the way. So now it's probably would be helpful to look at the sort of 5 steps to your net zero journey. And what is really important here would be to take a step back and think, where are you on this journey? And it's worth saying it doesn't matter where you are, because what's important is that we're all here for the same reason. But effectively, step 1 is to start measuring, because you can't manage what you don't measure. And the reason step 1 and 2 are sort of the same in terms of it being measuring and finding your entire carbon baseline is that you can really divide measuring, and I'll go into this a little bit in the second slide, but you can separate some of the scope 3 categories. So there's core scope 3 and then a full scope 3. And that's just so to start your net zero journey, you would measure your full scope 1, full scope 2, and then your core scope 3. So that would be step 1. And then step 2 would be measuring the entirety of your scope 3 and outlining your net zero baseline. So once you have your baseline, you would be able to set your net zero target. So that would be your interim to 2050 ambitious target. And then once you've got your targets in place, you'd be able to set your net zero transition plan, which is critical, because without this net zero transition plan, you wouldn't have the exact strategy to get to those ambitious targets. And step 5 really sits under 2, 3, and 4, because working as a team and engaging all of your stakeholders is critical in order to reach these ambitious goals. So this is a good opportunity, maybe after this webinar, to have a think, where might you be on this 5-step plan to net zero? And here I'm just going to quickly bring back the slides of your scopes 1 to 3. James did a brilliant job of highlighting what these different scopes are and what they mean. So your scopes 1, 2, and 3, with, as you can see, the scope 3 being the very complicated 15 categories. But this is just to reference this section here. So I won't go into it again, but just to jog your memory again. So once you have your full carbon footprint, you can establish your full net zero baseline. And here on the board is an example of a pure carbon baseline. So we at Planet Mark use carbon dioxide as the metric, and this would be an example of an organization's full carbon footprint. So as you can see, and it's the same for most organizations, scope 3 is the biggest one, and it's demonstrated here on the pie charts. Over 90% of emissions in this example is scope 3. And while it won't be the same for all organizations, it is something you would expect to see because of how many different categories there are and how big organizations' value chains are. So it's relatively typical for organizations that Planet Mark work with. Brilliant. And I just wanted to bring up the net zero transition plan again. That was the step 4. This is, part 4 of setting your net zero journey. So step 1 and 2 is the measure aspect. Step 3 is setting the targets. And then this is step 4. And this is absolutely essential to becoming a net zero organization, because whilst net zero targets will help you dictate where you want to get to, this maps out your journey of how you intend to reach those near-term and long-term net zero targets. And it's covered in what we would call a net zero transition plan document. And increasingly, we're seeing organizations sharing their net zero transition plans in the public domain to demonstrate that they do have a robust strategy in place in order to reach these targets. What would you expect to see in a transition plan? So it includes information on your overall business ambitions, your governance structures, the engagement within your value chain, the wider industry changes that's needed, net zero targets, and the short, medium, and long-term decarbonisation actions for your organisations, what they need to take in order to achieve them. and how you're going to be measuring progress against these targets. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight this as this is a document you might start to see from larger organizations publishing them in the public domain, and actually might be really helpful to sort of look through when you do see them to see what other organizations are doing. So just wanted to bring up the measure, engage, communicate. So this is actually the tool that Planet Mark uses when we look at integrating net zero into a company strategy. Yeah, we'd encourage you to take Planet Mark's 3 pillars of measure, engage, and communicate as a lens for when you approach sustainability. Because again, it's you cannot manage what you don't measure, but then once you're starting that journey, it's brilliant to engage all of your key internal stakeholders and all of your staff, and then really communicate your progress to all of your customers and external stakeholders. But we'll touch on this a little bit more later. I now want to pass back on to James, who's going to talk us through some case studies of businesses committed to net zero that we work with.
Hi, thanks, Roxy. So yeah, I just wanted to take a bit of time to talk through just some case studies, because we've talked quite a lot about how you should do things and why it's important. But I think something that can bring it to life is actually going through some actual real life companies who have gone on this journey. And what I want to do with each of them, so I've got 4 case studies, and what I wanted to do with each of them is highlight the actual tangible commercial benefits that they've seen by starting this journey, alongside all the compliance and all the trying to save the world for future generations reasons why companies do this. There's some tangible commercial benefits as well. So the first one to highlight is a company called Sanderson Design. So they are, sorry, let me bring up my notes so I can get this right. So they're an international luxury interior furnishing group. So they, you can see some of their nice furnishings behind this lady here on the screen. But the key thing I wanted to highlight here is that they created a roadmap to drive net zero to 2030. So they weren't even aiming for 2050, let alone 2040. They wanted to try and achieve net zero in 2030 because they realized they wanted to meet customers' expectations, their clients' expectations, and they wanted to make sure that they reduce their scope 1 and 2 because they themselves are manufacturers. So their scope 1 and 2 is relatively high. The real benefit that I wanted to highlight for these guys is that they are part of an association called the Royal Warrant Holders. So because they supply and they furnish out some of the palaces and some of the big castles around the UK, they get awarded with a Royal Warrant Holder because they're in the supply chain of the royals, basically. And when the Queen sadly passed away and the King took over, King Charles, basically they had to go through a whole reapplication process to get their new badge. And because King Charles is such an advocate for the climate, a big reason or a big thing that he was looking for his new royal warrant holders was that they had really strong ESG credentials. And because Sanderson Design were Planet Mark certified, they had this amazing net zero target, and they demonstrated all the carbon reductions over a number of years. They were not only able to regain their royal warrant, but they were actually able to, off the back of that, gain so much more business with the royal households. And now they are, they're laughing because they've got this amazing badge. They certified, they work with the King and Queen, and they've managed to get tons of business off of the back of this, just because when the King came asking, they had all of the sustainability credentials ready to hand over and say, yep, we're the person you should keep working with. We're very sustainably minded and have this amazing net zero goal. The next one I wanted to speak about was the furniture practice. So again, like a international furniture specialist, again, I always want to get it right. So for workplace and shared living. So they're an international company. So they have teams in London, New York, Manchester, Glasgow, and Paris. And so they've got quite a complex scope 1, 2, and 3 when it comes to their emissions. And they wanted to, establish their baseline, identify future products that were really low carbon, and make sure that they were driving innovation. I think the key thing that they realized is, like, all the different types of furniture that they manufacture and sell, they've got such a complicated supply chain from all the different components that make up their furniture. So one thing they identified was that their biggest part of their scope 1, 2, and 3 was their scope 3, specifically their supply chain category 1, scope 3. So in order to try and reduce that and try and basically reduce those emissions, they decided that they were going to run supply chain education workshops for their suppliers. So all of the people who make anything from the material or the foam or the individual carpenters who work on their furniture, they invited them all down to London, and they basically ran an entire day's workshop. And Planet Mark were invited in that, which was great. But they basically had everyone to come in, and it was a really great opportunity not only for the furniture practice to build their relationship with their suppliers, but they actually managed to upskill them, educate them, and while they're in London, form those stronger relationships with their suppliers. The benefit of that, I hope, is clear. Like, they were managed to negotiate better deals with their suppliers, bring their suppliers on their journey with them, and they are now confident that all of the people that they work with are on the same sustainability journey as them, and also de-risking and all of the benefits that Roxy talked about before, like de-risking, being more financially responsible, things like that. So they're confident, and they've got a better representation from their supply chain there. Cool. The third example I want to talk about are a company called Allwyn. So for those of you who don't know, Allwyn actually won the UK tender to run the national lottery. So the national lottery gets run in 10-year cycles, and there was a company, I can't remember the name, who ran the national lottery for the last 10 years, and I think the 10 years before that. Allwyn bid. When the tender came up, they bid for the national lottery running of it, and amongst other things like the price, the management style, all how they were going to revolutionize the national lottery and keep it going and keep funding things like UK sport and UK athletics. The key differentiator that they were able to propose was that they were going to make the national lottery the first global lottery from any country that was going to have a net zero target and be focused on reducing the emissions of the organization and of the initiative. And off the back of that, and I'm sure sustainability was only one part of the reason why they won the tender, but they did win the tender. And now the National Lottery, as well as providing the amazing service that it does and providing all the great charitable good that it does, is now the first UK or the first global national lottery that has a net zero target and has sustainable focused goals. So Allwyn, based on the fact that they just had done the work and to set their net zero target and measured their carbon emissions and had a plan, were able to win this massive multi-hundred of million pound deal, just purely on the back of the fact that they had done this small amount of work to make sure they were sustainable and could prove that they were and had this net zero target as well. The final case study is a bit more just tangible. So our parent company, Alcumus, when we started working with them and when Planet Mark became part of the Alcumus group, they have a really massive office in Cardiff, and they said, we've got all this roof space, and we really want to make sure that we're maximizing, the amount of on-site renewable energy that we're generating. And through some of our partners that we were able to recommend to them, you can see some of not only the energy savings and some of the carbon savings, but some of the cost savings over a number of years. So what's the project savings? So they're going to save over £500,000 just from the solar installation over the next 25 years. Not only that, but they're going to be less pressure, they're going to be less reliant on the UK national grid. They're going to be able to, if there's another war or another global issue where energy prices fluctuate again, they're not going to be impacted by that as much, because they are just going to be safe in the knowledge that they can just keep generating electricity from their solar relay and not be at pressure from the UK national grid. So really amazing story there that just really is a bit more tangible. Like, because of this project and because they were able to invest in this, they were able to actually de-risk themselves in the future and save a bit of money, as well as going a long way to achieving their sustainability goals. What I would say is, for any of the smaller companies who don't own their own building or anything like that, make sure that you're working with companies that have solar energy generation that you can work in their offices, or even think about just getting a green energy contract with like Octopus Energy or someone like that, because it's a really simple and easy way to reduce your scopes 1 and 2 emissions, but actually it's becoming more and more competitive as well. And I think as the UK becomes greener and greener, the UK grid becomes greener and greener, the prices will only keep going down. So it's definitely something to take away from today. But those are just the 4 examples I wanted to show you of companies that, because of the amazing work they've done on sustainability, they're making the world a better place, they're being more compliant, but importantly, they're saving money, becoming more commercially resilient, and actually, getting ahead of the competition as well. So hopefully those 4 examples put it into context, but I'll give back to Roxy to carry on and finish off the presentation today.
Thank you, James. Yeah, so with the last few minutes, and again, any questions, please do pop them into the Q&A function. We'd love to have a shot at answering all of them. But with the last few minutes, I'd love to just introduce you to a bit more to Planet Mark and what our net zero certification program is. So the net zero certification program is actually a new program that we launched in January. And we took everything that we learnt and did with previous members, with some of our long-lasting members as well, for the previous decade for one approach. And it's a 4-tiered certification with 5 membership packages. So the 4 tiers are net zero, so business, net zero committed, net zero aligned, and net zero achieved. And the reason there's 5 different membership packages is that within the first entry level, so Planet Mark certified business, there are actually 2 different membership packages. And those relate to the different scope 3 categories that you can measure. So with 1A certified business, that's just your core scope 3 core categories. And then with 1B certified advanced, it's your full scope 3. And the reason we've done this is so that any organization can begin this journey, even if they cannot measure their entirety of scope 3. But in all of these certification levels, all of our members have full access to the Planet Mark Academy, where all of our toolkits, resources, and support takes place, including member-specific webinars. This is also where we work with our Measure, Engage, and Communicate framework. So how does this program map onto the critical path to net zero? So I think the clearest way we can show how Planet Mark certifications map onto the critical trajectory to net zero is, I don't think they're coming up. Let's see if, here we go. So is by mapping it onto the graph that James showed before. So you can see with the very first at 100%, that would represent a business becoming a business certified. So they're measuring their full scopes 1 to 3 baseline. And then net zero committed would be us seeing that the business is reducing their carbon emissions towards their interim targets. And once that business has met their interim target, so the 50% reduction by 2030, or it can be a different interim target as well, sort of a different time frame, they would move on to net zero aligned. And then we would see that moving down into Planet Mark net zero achieved. We don't actually have any companies yet on the Planet Mark net zero achieved, but hopefully very soon. And within 3 years of joining Planet Mark, we often expect any member to be ready to establish targets and a transition plan with support from our strategy team. Yep. So no work within climate change and net zero is done in isolation, and neither was our net zero certification program. So I'd just like to highlight a few of these on here. And as James mentioned before, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So that's the organisation who came up with scopes 1, 2 and 3. And that fundamentally is what we use in our measuring. So science-based targets, they set the guidelines for the UK-wide targets, and we align our process and target setting with the SBTI initiative. And we really do understand that regulation and policy can be a challenging part of this. And so the easiest way for you to stay ahead of the curve on net zero is to be part of the community that is actively helping to design the curve. And another one, so we are one of 10 official UN Race to Zero partners supporting businesses worldwide, meaning that when an organization makes a net zero commitment with us, it is automatically recognized by the UN. And we also help to develop the ISO net zero guidelines and have been recognised as the first worldwide early adopter for the way we have aligned our net zero programme with the recommendations. And finally, I'll just point out the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standards. So we are one of 20 organisations who help to develop these standards. So yeah, these are some of the organisations we're aligned with. So we're nearing the end of our presentation. So thank you so much for those who have stayed with us today. And there's been a lot of information, and you'll have access to all of the slides. So please do take a look at anything that's interested you throughout. But these are some of the questions that I think organizations should be asking themselves. I think one that's quite important that I'd like to highlight as well is the leadership on board? And that kind of refers to your key internal stakeholders as well. So I'm going to leave you some of these questions to reflect on, but we can also move on to the Q&A if you have any questions for us. So thank you so much. And I'll also just leave with this slide. I can leave these slides on the board, or I can also stop sharing for the Q&A, whatever you prefer, James.
You can leave them there, Roxana. That's lovely. Thank you
Brilliant,
very much.
brilliant. Yes, and just to highlight the upcoming events as well. So these are free Planet Mark webinars that anyone is welcome to join, and we'd really love to see you there. But thank you all so much for today.
Thank you for the both of you. That was really informative. I learned a lot. And it was lovely to have net zero explained. I think it's one of those phrases, and carbon neutral and, as you said, net zero are bandied about quite a lot. You see it in the news, social media, and to actually have them explained was lovely. So thank you very much for that. And thank you for the discounts that you're offering as well. That's brilliant. That's very good. Thank you. For anyone who has a question, if you would like to pop it in the chat or the Q&A section, the webinar will go on our website shortly, later today or tomorrow, but it will be announced when it's up there. And we will be giving a copy to Planet Mark as well, to share as they need to. So that would be lovely. And by signing up to this, people did agree that we would share their information with Planet Mark. So obviously that will be shared after we've finished today as well. So I don't think we have any questions. I've not seen.
I was just checking the chat, and it seems people are just saying thank you, which you obviously are very welcome.
Which is lovely.
Thank you for joining us.
All I would say is that we are here to help, because I think there's a massive skills gap when it comes to, as Dee was just saying, there's a massive skills gap when it comes to knowing what net zero is versus knowing what carbon neutral is, not even for your own business, for like just understanding what it means if someone says those terms to you. So we are here to help, and we'd like happily sit down with you and explore this further if you need any help there, because I think it helps the entire sector if people are all aligned in the same way and all trying to achieve the same thing. So do let us know. We're here to help.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, if there's no more questions, someone's reached out to you on LinkedIn, so thank you for that.
Wonderful.
If there's no more questions, I'm going to end the session now. So thank you all for coming. I can see that Planet Mark have a couple of events coming up. Our next webinar is going to be in August, so just to let you know that. But thank you all for attending, and look out for the webinar. If you want to share with friends, it will be up on our website shortly. Thank you. Thank you, James. Thank you, Roxana.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.